Oh, okay. Thank you, Nathan. Our next topic is the trouble with tickets, in which Captain Kirk battles a rapidly reproducing alien that gives off a seductive vibration. No, wait. That's about how to report a bug. Our presenter is David Azarewicz, who is a hardware designer and software developer. David is one of the principals of ArcaNoa and currently works on various projects such as ACPI, Multimac, USB, UniOdd, JFS, and various other drivers. Thank you very much. Go ahead, David. Okay.
Hello, my name is David. I'm going to be talking today about trouble tickets. I'll be going over how to open a ticket and the best way to fill it out. I'll also cover some things that you can do to make sure no one works on your ticket. Since I'm one of the developers that handles tickets, I have some first-hand experience with some of the techniques that have been used by some reporters, so I'll share some of them with you. First of all, we all know that we should read or review the best practices wiki. We also know, and it says on the wiki, that we should read the README and the documentation before opening a ticket because the problem that you're having may already be documented. We know that we should choose a summary for the ticket that clearly describes the problem. We know that we should provide a clear set of steps to reproduce the problem so that the developer can reproduce the problem. And we know that we should attach adequate supporting data to the ticket. But what really happens? How often do you jump directly to opening a ticket before reading the documentation or reviewing the wiki? It's something to think about. But for this presentation, let's assume that you've already done everything you need to do, you've read the documentation, and you've decided that you need to open a ticket. When you open a ticket, there's a few preliminary fields that you need to fill out before you get to the main ticket. So let's go over them and kind of give you some idea of how to do that. The first thing you need to choose is the project for your ticket. Sometimes this will be obvious and other times it won't. If you don't know or have some doubt, choose General. That is the default. And that's perfectly fine because later on the developer will move your ticket to the appropriate project if necessary. The second thing you need to choose is the category. Now these categories change depending on which project you've chosen, and if you choose the general category, the general project, you will only have the option of general for the category. The next thing is reproducibility. Here you should indicate how often the problem occurs, because this will tell us, the developers, whether this is a consistent problem or whether it only happens intermittently, and that's important. The only unacceptable answers for this field are have not tried and unable to reproduce. Have not tried just tells us that you haven't bothered to do even the minimum amount of work before opening a ticket. And if you cannot reduce the problem, how do you know it's a real problem? After all, what is there to fix? The next thing is severity and priority. Feel free to change these to whatever you feel is appropriate. They don't really have any effect on your ticket. And then comes the product version. Now this is the version of whatever it is that you're having trouble with. If you're having trouble with ArcaOS as a whole, then that will be the version of ArcaOS. If you're having trouble with a specific driver or a specific whatever it is, then that will be the version of the particular thing you're having trouble with. The next thing that you'll have to fill out, and this is one of the most important things of your ticket, is the summary. This is a short little thing that kind of identifies the ticket to everyone. So what makes a good summary? Well, it should briefly say why you opened the ticket. That sounds reasonable, doesn't it? After all, if you're having a problem, you should probably say so. If you want help, that is. It should also probably mention the problem. Don't you think? All sounds reasonable, sounds like obvious, right? Well, let's take a look. These are some actual recent summaries from real-life tickets. In other words, these are some examples of how to discourage anyone from looking at your ticket. Let's take a look. Dynamic icons. Yep, we have those. Next ticket. MMRE driver. Yep, we've got that too. Next. 5.0.5 installation update, failure and success. Well, aside from the spelling problems, I can't tell if there's a specific technical problem being reported here. Apparently, there was success, so next ticket. Phantom floppy drive. Does he have one? Does he want one? Can't tell. Regardless, I don't see a problem here, so next ticket. Resizing of desktop. Whatever that is. Next. Widescreen monitor. Yep, we've got those. Next. DOS Windows and WinOS 2 Windows. Yep, we've got those too. Next ticket. ArcaMapper Global Options Defaults. Defaults sound good to me. Next. Updating from 5.0.3 to 5.0.5. Well, I'm glad you're doing that, because if you're having trouble, updating to the newest software is always a good idea. But there's really not a reason to open a ticket to tell us that. Next. So, imagine that, there's a few of us that work on tickets. And periodically, we'll just scan through the list of tickets to see if there's something we can work on. So if I scan the summaries and I see these, what happens is exactly what I showed you here. Next, 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 I don't even look at them. Someone might eventually look at them eventually, but it's certainly not going to be right away, and it will take more time. So, what should a summary look like? Let's look at some examples. And by the way, these are actual real-life summaries from real tickets. This one says, hang at loading resource.sys in phase 2 boot. Well, does this indicate a problem? Yeah, a hang. When? Or doing what? Yeah, loading resource.sys in phase 2 boot. It tells me that there's a problem kind of when it's happening, and I would look at this ticket. The loading resource.sys is kind of a catch-all that doesn't really mean anything, but it's still not a bad summary, and I would look at it. Let's look at another one. Runtime error 216 and shell hang during installation boot from DVD. Now, this tells me there's a problem. It tells me what you're doing, and again, I would look at it. Let's look at another one. Update ArcaOS 5.04 to 5.05 hangs at 5%. Okay, once again, I've got an installation going on and it hangs. A problem and what you're doing. Gives me context. It's a decent summary. I'd look at it. Exception in module OS2 boot trap D on reboot after phase 2. Now look at this one. It's telling me there's a problem, clearly an exception, a trap. Doing what? rebooting after phase 2, so obviously they're doing an installation. See, these are all decent summaries. Notice any patterns here? A good summary states the problem clearly but briefly and provides some context. By the way, on the first two, the little asterisk means that this is not the summary that was entered by the reporter. This summary was edited by the developer and changed after reviewing the ticket. So, now you know what a good summary looks like. Let's take a look at the next thing you need to provide, the steps to reproduce. It clearly says in the wiki, and I have said numerous times, that the steps to reproduce is not how you produce the problem. It's how the developer can reproduce the problem. Imagine the developer sitting at his machine, looking at your ticket, and trying to do what you did so he can try to reproduce the same problem you had. You need to tell him exactly, step by step, what you did or what he needs to do, what settings were used, what programs are needed, all of the information necessary so that he can try and do the same thing you did, because that's going to make your problem a lot easier to solve. So, what really happens? Let's take a look. In other words, examples of how to discourage work on your ticket. Let's take a look at the first one. All the time when you connect the mentioned device. I don't really see any steps there, so I'll go on to the next ticket. Not much more to say. No steps there either. It happens like one time of each 3 boots of the machine. It's not exactly. Okay, still no steps. I get this and other failures when I run the application. Okay, still no steps. Next, install via USB stick. Okay, let's move on. Some people might argue that these reporters just didn't understand what steps to reproduce means. Well, if that were true, that would just go to prove that they didn't look at and read the best practices wiki like they were supposed to before opening the ticket. The wiki clearly states what steps to reproduce is. It also seems that people tend to open tickets like they just found something that never got tested. No. The software is thoroughly tested before it's released. What you really should assume is that it works for everyone else, and you're doing something different than everyone else. We need to know what you're doing different, so tell us. That's really the bottom line. The best thing to do is tell us what you're doing, and we'll try our best to help. Let's look at some examples of steps to reproduce that actually are okay. Here's one. Install Arca OS on a virtual PC for OS 2. Select install volume, locale, and no sound. Install, and they say which type of installation to do, and so on. Basically, this is a list of steps that I could follow to try and reproduce the problem. Let's take a look at another one. This one's got some numbers. Like the previous one, you don't have to have numbers, but you can. It's perfectly fine, as long as there is a sequence of things that the developer can do to step through and try and see if they can create the same situation that you created. Let's look at some of the other fields that come after the steps to reproduce. There is another field called additional information. You can leave this blank, or you can put whatever doesn't fit in the other categories. If there's any additional information you think the developer might need to know, then you should put it here. The next thing is the license type. That's either personal or commercial. Choose whichever license type you've got that you're asking for help with. If it's incorrect, the developer will probably change it for you. The next thing is upload file. I strongly suggest that you do not do this here. If you have files, which you should, to attach to your ticket, first create the ticket and then go back and add all your data. It works much more reliably that way. The next thing you need to choose is the view status. This is either public or private. Public means anyone can look at the ticket and all the comments and all your data. Private means that no one can see your ticket or any of the data except for you, the developers, and the administrators. So if you've got some private information or things you need or you would like to keep private, you can change the status to private right there. And if you forget, you can always ask the developer and they'll change it to private for you. The last thing is report stay, and I would also suggest that you do not check this box. If you have more than one ticket to open, just open another ticket separately. Next, I'd like to go over some of those things that I promised you a little earlier about how to not get help. There are a few things that I've seen that just boggle the mind. Anyway, the first thing is don't provide any data in the ticket. I'll tell you, it does no one any good to just open a ticket and claim that you have a problem and not tell anybody about it or give them any way to help. It may seem obvious, but just telling us that you have a problem doesn't help us understand anything about what actually happened. Remember what I said earlier. Assume that no one else has ever seen this problem and you're the only one that's having the problem. So provide us enough data so we can tell what you're doing differently. The next thing of how to not get help is tell us what you think is happening instead of providing any actual data. This may seem obvious too, but at least I want to see actual data. If I'm working the ticket, if I've chosen this ticket to work on, it's probably because I wrote the software that's involved and I understand how it works. I want to see actual data. I'll do my own analysis. The next thing that'll guarantee you your ticket won't get worked on is refuse to follow directions. If we've asked you for another test or another file or another log or something, it's because we don't have enough information to tell what's going on. If you don't do that or you never get back to us or anything, sorry, but the ticket just won't get worked on anymore. Here's another thing. Posting in someone else's ticket. Yeah, sorry, that's not going to help you either. In most cases, your post will just get deleted. If you have a problem, open your own ticket. It's the best way to get help. Plus, it lets us know what's going on with the software. Here's another one, kind of a pet peeve of mine. Say stuff like, it works on Windows, or it works in Linux. Well, OS2 is not Windows. OS2 is not Linux. OS2 is a completely different architecture. It doesn't work the same way as Windows. It doesn't work the same way as Linux. Additionally, both Windows and Linux have hundreds of developers working on it, and they have the ability to address all the different quirks and defects of the different hardware out there. We don't have that kind of manpower. And historically and currently, ArcaOS and OS2 has always required properly working hardware. Our software is written to the specs to the standards, and it assumes that the hardware works according to the specs. While we do have some workarounds and we can address some of the quirks in malfunctioning hardware, we can't catch it all. We can't address everything. Plus, there's also architectural differences between OS/2 and the other operating systems, which means that in some cases it will never work the same way. In general, when I see it works on Windows, I take that to be proof that the hardware is really broken. And the last way you can definitely not get any help is to be an asshole. It may be surprising, but we see this. Rude commentary, disparaging remarks, and personal attacks are actually violations of the ticket guidelines and can result in forfeiture of your privileges to the ticket system. Yeah, there's a few things here that may be surprising to some. That why would I say anything here? But you know what? It's because they've actually happened. So, one last thing I'd like to talk about briefly before I end this presentation is the TestLog program. The TestLog program provides the developer with a comprehensive log of your system. The TestLog program is a very invasive diagnostic tool. It scans the system and captures a lot of information about exactly what's happening in the system at the time you ran the program. It captures dynamic state of the system, not static state. So every time you run it, the log will be different. That's why it's important to run the TestLog program when the problem exists in the system. Always use the latest version of the TestLog program. The TestLog program is fairly mature, so it doesn't get a lot of changes anymore. But since it is an invasive program, it pokes around in the drivers and in the kernel and things to capture information and state. So if drivers get updated, there is a possibility that the TestLog program may need to be updated to match the new drivers. And obviously, if you're opening a ticket, you've already made sure you're running the latest drivers, right? Running the TestLog program clears the debug buffers in the drivers. So you should really only run it once per boot. Don't do a practice run of the TestLog program just to see how it works, and then run it again to create the log that you attach to your ticket. If you do that, you're going to lose data, and the log file will be worthless, and we'll have to ask you to do it again. And as I said earlier, always capture log files in the system configuration that causes the problem, and if possible, when the problem exists and as close to when the problem occurs. Now, obviously, if the problem causes a trap, you can't run TestLog program after a trap. But in any case, always in the same configuration that caused the problem. So if you've got a keyboard that stops working, don't unplug that keyboard and plug in a different one to run the TestLog program, because obviously the log program will not be able to capture any information about the device you just unplugged. And if you reboot before capturing the TestLog log file, then obviously everything's going to be cleared away. These are a few of the resources for opening trouble tickets. The first thing is the collection of wikis at arkanoa.com/wiki. You can also see all the wikis by clicking on the support menu item right on the front page. It will get you to the wikis. The second item is the best practices page on the wikis. You can get to the best practices page from the same place all the other wikis are. It's down at the bottom. And then the third thing is the Mantis ticket system itself. You really shouldn't need this link because You're supposed to read the best practices page first, and there's a link to the wiki. There's a link to the Mantis ticket system on the best practices page. Anyway, I hope this has given you some idea of the things that you can do to help make your ticket get handled as quickly and as easily as possible, plus some things if you just want to open tickets and have them never get addressed. Thanks for listening.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, David. I don't know if there is any questions online.
I've kind of been answering them as we go along.
Yeah. Yes, there are no other questions. No, there. I'm just waiting for the delay if there is any questions online, but let's just wait a little bit. Oh, they say there is a TestLog question on the YouTube chat.
Yeah, well, yes, the TestLog program asks for a ticket number. That helps us coordinate the log file with the ticket number in case they get separated for some reason. I, for one, work on lots of tickets all at the same time, and I download the different log files and I try and keep them straight, and having the ticket number in the log helps me correlate which log file goes with which ticket. Now, obviously, you can create your ticket before generating the log file, or if you've generated a log file, obviously you don't have the ticket number yet, and that's fine. But if you do, or if it's the second log or additional information, it always helps if you can put that in there.
I just want to say, David, that I have been using TestLog, and it's a great tool to extract all the information from the computer, from the hardware, from the drivers. It's a very complete log. I really like it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's been a long time in development. It started off as a very simple rec script and just kind of grew and grew and grew based on what we need. You know, when we're working on a ticket and we realize there's information that we really need but don't have, I kind of modify the TestLog program to include it.
Okay, let's check if there's any additional questions.
I don't see one.
No? Okay, great. So thank you very much, David. Thanks for your time, and we will see you in a few minutes, I guess.
Yep, right after Lewis.
Okay. Thank you, David.
You're welcome.
Yes, thanks.